Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Lorelle Bowditch. I'm the scientific co-convener of this year's Congress, and I'm also a PhD student and a research assistant at Central Queensland University. Today we'll hear from two presenters on the topic of educational developments in serious games. And just a quick reminder to leave your questions for our presenters in the Q&A box on your right. We'll have time at the end of the address to address them. We'll now hear from our first presenters, Leigh from Green Hat Cybersecurity and Charles Darwin University, and also Miranda from Charles Darwin University. Thank you, Gary and Miranda.
Thanks so much, Lorelle. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen to get this presentation started. All right, fantastic. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for our session on digital CIMEX in humanitarian education. And I'd also like to thank the organisers of this event for providing us with this opportunity to share our experience. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respect to elders both past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Between June 2020 and 21, Gary and myself delivered humanitarian training using digital simulation exercises. And these exercises drew upon real-world events and reflected complex requirements in adult education today. Gary was providing the no limits technical aspect. He designed full-day simulations to allow students to gain real-world skills in humanitarian response. I coordinate the Bachelor of Humanitarian Aid and Development at CDU and provided lectures on topics across international relations, disaster management, and humanitarian assistance. In total, we delivered the unit to over 100 undergraduate students that comprised of 2 specialised humanitarian assistance cohorts and also 2 cross-discipline cohorts, so across the undergraduate body of the university. And we used a participant onboarding form before the unit began, and this was really central to team composition and unit content because it allowed the students to provide us with information about knowledge and skills that they already had, so we could create diverse multidisciplinary teams. So our experience delivering the unit is situated in the broader field of simulations for humanitarian education. So concurrent to the increase in global humanitarian need over the last decade has been the expansion, but also the professionalization of the humanitarian field. And this in particular includes the developments of frameworks, codes, standards, and principles that guide the delivery of emergency relief. So at the same time that the humanitarian field has been professionalizing, there's been a growing need for humanitarian and disaster response simulations to train humanitarian workers in both the theoretical knowledge and technical competencies prior to their deployment in the field. So although these simulations have been delivered in person and digitally in the past, digital simulations do have the benefit of addressing the need for practitioners to be able to manage and deliver humanitarian programs remotely. And as we can see on the slide, just like our students experienced challenges to humanitarian access that caused them to design remote solutions for their humanitarian programs, limits to humanitarian access in the real world have been experienced. Historically, this is due to the nature of rapid onset disasters, for example, or conflicts that prevent humanitarian access. But of course, more recently, infection risks, border control, travel restrictions, and staff evacuations associated with COVID-19 have created new demand for professionals skilled in remote work. So the unit is a 2-week on-campus work integrated learning intensive. So traditionally delivered on campus, and the core requirement is that students participate in the technical and logistical management of a simulated humanitarian disaster event. Along with its on-campus delivery, it's also traditionally involved the engagement of government and representative bodies from Australia's foreign aid. But just like our students experienced the COVID-19 pandemic in the Crab Key Isles, as we see on the slides here, COVID-19 restrictions in the Northern Territory prevented the traditional delivery of the unit on campus about 4 weeks out from the date that it was due to be delivered. The challenges that we confronted in addition to these restrictions on on-campus delivery were or included what is ethical and reasonable for us to ask of undergraduate students. Based on our comparator analysis, how do we meet and exceed what's already being offered? And how do we manage the expectations of those who are less familiar about the role of serious games in adult education today? So in addressing these questions, our objective was not simply to take the unit and deliver it online, but it was to reimagine and redesign this unit from the ground up, including pedagogical understandings and standards in humanitarian education. And as a result, we put learners and technology at the forefront. We began with a meta-literature review of the design, impact, and lessons of games and learning outcomes for simulations in humanitarian education. In designing the unit, we drew upon the humanitarian learning standards, which are 8 criteria that inform and measure the provision of quality learning for humanitarian education. The SPHERE handbook was used to inform the design of games to test students' technical competencies across those 4 life-saving sectors of water, sanitation and hygiene promotion, food security and nutrition, health, and shelter and settlement. We also drew upon the ASEAN Emergency Response and Assessment Team guidelines for students to develop their cross-cultural competencies in the Asia-Pacific region. As a result of our research, we developed 3 modules: foundations, clusters and skills, and cases and causes. And as you can see on the slide here, this resulted in a combination of lectures, in-class activities, workshops, and 3 full-day simulations. And the topics range from humanitarian principles, legal frameworks for humanitarian action, protection, localization and accountability, negotiation, humanitarian and civil military coordination, logistics, and of course, those core technical competencies for the SPHERE handbook. And the students applied their knowledge through these 3 full-day simulations. So the games were designed to test students' learning and skill development, and we provided templates. In the first simulation, students undertook a field planning and field safety exercise. In the second simulation, students were required to demonstrate their skills and knowledge in site selection and settlement planning in responding to a scale-up response in the Darwin area. And the third simulation, Operation Elidcam, there's an example of one of the resources for this simulation on the slide, where students inherited an ongoing humanitarian response and had 24 hours to present a solution to the challenges. And all the games built on each other for continuity. On the slide is another example of the nature of the games that use sanitized real-world documents that had the minimum required level of fidelity, but when used in the games provided the maximum required remote skills for humanitarian training. Here's another example of this, some of the resources that the students were provided in the final SIMEX. This is a camp profile. On the left of the slide here is one of the many images of camp maps that students were provided, and the image on the right is the camp profile. So we can see it provided information regarding the education and wash situation in the camp. Using these real-world resources, students were required to complete activities that were specific to their NGO. Their decisions informed the ongoing design of the game, and other students' decisions also impacted how the NGOs could deliver their objectives. They also use this information more generally to make recommendations to the camp coordination and camp management team. So again, requiring the application of that technical knowledge from the SPHERE handbook. So in addition to the humanitarian profiles and situation updates, those real-world documents that students were provided with, we also provided satellite and simple maps to support students to complete logistical activities, and this also assisted the students to develop their skills in humanitarian coordination, as they're required to use these satellite maps to coordinate with NGOs and militaries that were based on other islands and offshore. So serious games design and scenario-based learning really did provide the foundation for this unit. The learning outcomes were explicitly integrated into all of the games that we designed, that were designed. So to successfully complete the game, the students had to demonstrate the application of both their theoretical knowledge and technical skills. All of the games were experiential. Students needed to complete the task live within the required time frame, and in the game field setting, this time limit and abstracted nature provided a source of motivation. Whilst many games are hyper-realistic, ours were intentionally abstract. Students were required to be creative to fill in the templates, and that creativity, as I mentioned, also informed the ongoing design of the games. So it linked back to the role of games in unlocking students' ability to learn. The only boundary that we had is that students do not cross into reality. So there was a deliberate focus on students maintaining a level of abstraction in the game. Nonetheless, they did bring their own realism. So we have an example of a satellite map here on the slide, and although the only rule that we had was do not cross into reality, students would take into account information provided about the terrain, for example, or distance required to travel. And one of the final outcomes was that there was an emphasis on convergence. So the emphasis on learning experiences, creativity, and the focus on abstraction meant that students converged, for example, through the development of MOUs with other NGOs. So the games were more effective when students worked together. In terms of our outcomes, all students successfully completed the unit. We received net promoter scores of above 9 out of 10. The games and gameplay encouraged significant outputs, and the outputs were informed by the practical application of handbooks and tools that are used in the humanitarian field today. A final outcome to note is that there were very strong links between the theoretical and classroom-based and scenario-based learning, students' professional environments, and actions and steps that were taken in the policy of SPHERE in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some lessons learned were that serious games and scenario-based learning did enable students to meet the learning outcomes at no disadvantage. We used immersive and commonplace digital technologies, and compared to more sophisticated technologies such as VR or walled garden games, the use of Zoom or satellite maps was and is continuing to be used in the humanitarian field today. So there were transferable skills. The intensive format was effective as a pedagogical tool when combined with the games. In terms of our future directions, we're currently in discussions with the ADF and Marine Rotational Force around simulations. There's a question around digital and analog. So given the effective use of commonplace digital technologies today, there is a question around how much further innovation is required. And we also acknowledge the continued salience of face-to-face learning and training. There's always opportunities for further research. So we're going to continue to explore lessons learned as the unit continues to be delivered. Thank you everybody for listening to this presentation and look forward to responding to any questions during the Q&A. Thanks, Lorelle.
Thanks, Miranda. That was brilliant. Great. And yes, a reminder for any questions to pop them into the Q&A box. Awesome. Karen, if you want to start sharing your slides. So the next presenter is Karen Hall from Swinburne University of Technology.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm just coming to talk to you about the Safety at Work project that we did, which was a major project involving Scope Australia and Swinburne University of Technology. Basically, it was government funded and it was a large project that's still going, and it's been going for about 2 years. So very hard to tell you all about it in 15 minutes, but I'll give it a go. Look, my name's Karen Hall. I was part of the research team on this project, and I brought with me Kath Moynihan, who was the educational lead for the PBS part of the program, and Haydon Bakker, who's our expert in VR and was part of the development team. Okay, so the background for this was occupational violence is quite a significant problem for disability support workers. We all are well aware that there is a huge need for more disability support workers and a huge need to support them. Is my video not working?
Your video's on, Karen, but I can't turn mine on.
Yeah, yours is on now, Karen.
That's all right.
Okay, 1 second.
All good?
All good, please continue.
Okay, great. So yeah, as I said, disability support workers are in high need at the moment, but we found that they were at risk of challenging behaviours from the people they support, which resulted in injury, a lot of stress for the employees, and for the organisation, particularly Scope, was lost time and a lot of turnover of staff due to the impact of challenging behaviour. Also, for our residents or consumers, there was a need to have the best quality of life. And so we came up with a solution that would create that for these people so that they could once again engage in community. So the solution was contemporary and experiential positive behaviour support training for the DWSs as well as our TAFE students. So we actually wanted to create a training that would be utilised in TAFE so that when they came out as disability support workers, they would have the skills in positive behaviour support, as well as we wanted to upskill the disability support workers and give them the skills in this positive behaviour support. We really wanted to be contemporary, so we VR supported it, and that there was for 2 reasons of that. We thought it offered flexibility of delivery, and also we wanted engagement for the people being involved in the training. And as I said, it was funded by the state government of Victoria. Flexible, we needed to be flexible because a lot of the workers were remote. So the whole idea was to get out to them online, and we could send out VR headsets to the people so they could be involved in remote areas. What we did find is that wasn't all that successful, and we actually did move it back to face-to-face. Large project team of Scope and Swinburne Higher Ed and Vocational Education. There were 3 streams that we had: the educational team with a PBS syllabus and delivery, and that involved psychologists and teachers. We had the creative design team, which were involved in the VR development, and they're from the Centre of Transformative Media Technologies at Swinburne. And then we had a research team, which comprised of a number of researchers from psychology, from health, from the creative transformative media technologies, as well as some research assistants. The research team looked at a number of research items. So we looked at comparisons of headsets, user experience, that we developed our own framework. And then we worked on Kirkpatrick's training model levels 1, 2, 3, 4 for our research. Initially, we started off face-to-face, had lots and lots of meetings, lots and lots of sticky notes where we worked out what we were going to do. However, our friend COVID came to play and we ended up online. It was quite funny because at one we were saying, well, what about COVID? And we said, oh, that's not really anything. And probably a week later, we were all online. So it happened very, very quickly. So consequently, there's lots of Zoom meetings here. We had individual teams working in their teams and together. We had teams with a curriculum design, the PBS syllabus. We looked at framework for delivery, which was based on simulation framework, mainly on Jeffrey's 2005 model of simulation for SPs. VR integration was put into the PBS framework, and a debrief framework that we use mainly of plus delta and probably gas was the main sort of background for the debrief framework. We delivered the program to 3 groups. And as I said, the last group was face-to-face until COVID came again and we ended up back online. And then there was evaluation and research. Okay, I'll hand over to Kath on this one.
Thanks, Karen. This list shows the 14 positive behaviour support principles developed by the scope psychologists and myself. They are based on the definition established by Gore and his colleagues in 2013. We aimed to make the key concepts more user-friendly and accessible by giving them short, catchy names and developing simple explanations for each. The principles can be used by staff to assist with their choice-making in the workplace, to support a positive behaviour support approach whenever possible. The principles actually function as a type of guide for staff, as well as providing a framework for them they can use to talk about their current practice and also the practice to which they aspire. For example, the principle, what's most important, asks staff to be flexible and make an informed decision about what they should do next. Should they spend time engaging with a client who's feeling at a bit of a loss for something meaningful to do, or it's time to get the dinner on, should they focus on preparing the meal? So this kind of dilemma is a common issue for residential disability support staff. The principles are embedded throughout the VR scenarios at every choice-making point. The participant makes a choice and either does or does not demonstrate the principle. This experience can then be discussed in the debrief. Karen, slide 6.
Okay, so we started, once we got through designing our curriculum, and we actually started filming motion captures. So we used some of our simulated actors that we use for SPs that we use within our simulation program. And they wore motion capture suits, and we actually informed their movements of a non-verbal person with a disability by having the PBS team there, as well as DSWs, as well as consumers. And I'll put this on so you can sort of see a little bit of the motion capture going on here, and Haydon in the background. Okay.
We're also in this scene using facial capture as well to get like a more detailed facial expressions, which is nice.
The project outcomes consist of the following: a 28-hour training program in positive behaviour support for workers with at least 6 months experience. There were 5 VR scenarios, 2 working with a character called Sophie, who you will see in a moment, 2 scenarios with Pat and 1 with Kirk, and also several research studies. This clip you're about to see is the opening sequence of Sophie 1.
Sophie's having meatballs for dinner tonight, so you'll want to start preparing those as soon as possible. I'll chat with you later once I get these done.
So Sophie's non-verbal, so we had the communication book in there as well, so that the students could communicate with her. And this is a way that we learned that we were speaking with Sophie. So there were speech bubbles. So there were no unintentional, pointing to the wrong thing. So it was very clear of what we wanted to say and what the students were saying. Okay, so the research, which was a big area of the project, and is still ongoing, involved a number of studies. The first study was a VR headsets, and it was a technical comparison. So we went through all the current headsets that were out there, and we looked at what was the best to utilise within the project. Taking in quality, graphics, as well as price and portability. So we went through all the headsets and compared them. The second literature review was learning and evaluation in VR in health. The third study was study 1 and 2 across Kirkpatrick's first 2 levels, reaction, which was done with the VE students, and learning, which was done with the DSWs. It was a multi-phase mixed method design, and as I said, using VE and DSWs. And study 3, still in progress, is across Kirkpatrick's last 2 levels, behaviour changes, as well as results for organisations. And that's a multiple single case studies. So the participants we had in study 1, we had 26 VE students. We had 5 in the attrition rate. Most of these fell out. We ran through an Oculus tutorial, and most of them fell out during the tutorial. They succumbed to simulation sickness, except for 1 who had to get to an appointment, which is fairly high rates. So we're kind of wondering about the Oculus tutorial there. We had the rest of them, 21, continued to go through the study, where they went through the tutorial for Sophie, as well as the actual game for Sophie twice. And they did it in Think Aloud protocol. And then they were asked questions pre and post. We had students who ranged between 18 and 67 years. We had 19 females and 7 males. And they were taken from individual support students, Cert 3, and Cert 4 allied health students. Study 2 was a study of the DSWs. And we used a lot of the questionnaires that we used in study 1 with these ones, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But we had a really poor participation rate. We had 12 that got involved in this study. That was out of 2 cohorts of training. So probably out of about 60 people or 50 people trained, we ended up with 12 that agreed to go through. Put that down to the fact that it was COVID and they were extremely busy in disability support. And also they were very experienced and very needed on the floor. So then we decided to rethink this, and in 2022, the last cohort that went through the PBS training, we will actually try and get them together face-to-face and actually go through the study with them. So that will be our study 2. And study 3 involves 3 houses, 3 residential houses, and most of that will be done in 2022. Okay, so the measures and instruments, study 1, pre and post test questionnaires, demographics for study 1, attitudes to computers was previous experience with disability was pre, and these were TAFE students. Attitude to simulation training was pre. Simulation sickness, we did pre and post. User experience in the framework that we established, we did post. Learning reactions, technology acceptance was post, and mental workload was post questionnaires. All these were taken from validated questionnaires. Study 2, Kirkpatrick's level 2, was the same as study 1, except for we compared VR versus non-VR. So some of the cohort went through PBS training, not using VR, using traditional methods, and some went through VR training. And as I said, we only got 12, so that we can't really gain anything out of that study yet. And also we looked at self-monitoring of confidence in PBS ability. Study 3, the houses, we're using the aberrant behaviour checklist, the Guernsey participation scale, caregiving difficulty scale, and the recording of all the incidents that happen within the houses under the STAR method. So the results, the comparison of headsets, we went with Oculus Quest because of the graphics, the quality, the price, portability and performance. That's been a little bit of a nightmare since Facebook took over Oculus, and has caused us a significant number of problems. However, I do understand that that's changing now, which is good, but probably wasn't a good choice then. And I think now, thinking about it, we would have probably gone with Pico rather than Oculus, had we known about the Facebook problem. Learning in evaluation and VR in healthcare, we found there was a lack of empirical VR literature, and most of it was done by enterprise and didn't have any research rigor, really. There was no studies of VR at Kirkpatrick's level 4, so that's why we put it into our studies for research. Study 1, we found that it was very much a positive user experience, and this is our framework that we came up with from a number of other frameworks. So we looked at presence, engagement, immersion, flow, emotion, skill, time, technology, and narrative and judgment. Look, we came up with means over 8 for all categories, which is really high, means 8 out of 10. It was a positive learning experience. Simulation sickness was well tolerated for the ones that survived, with 2 out of 10. And majority were computer literate, and learning and technology acceptance was 9 out of 10 in means. Okay, as I said, poor participation in the other one, so we will go through that into study 2, and we've changed it to face-to-face, and we're going to use the VR for integration with curriculum to start the activity and discussion around debrief. The reason for that is that most of the DSWs thought that the VR was too simple, and they were extremely experienced. So now we want to move it into another way and start it off as a sort of starter activity to start the conversation, and then test in 2022. And again, we've done baseline data for 2 houses, but we've still got one more to go, and we'll do the post data in 2022. Okay, so, and massive amount of acknowledgement said this is a team of thousands, almost. So you can see that there's quite a number of people from Swinburne, quite a number of people from Scope, and quite a number of very noted researchers in there as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Karen, Haydon, and Kath. We do have some time for some questions. So if Miranda, you'd like to pop your camera back on. We've got none in the Q&A at the moment. So if you do have any, make sure you pop them in. I do have one for you, Karen. You mentioned Facebook causing issues with Oculus. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, when we got the first Oculus Quest, you didn't have to have a Facebook account for it. So we were running an Oculus account. Then it was taken over by Facebook. So you then needed to have a Facebook account for the Oculus, which then becomes a security issue for obviously the university, having a Facebook account, and also the headsets, if there were multiple on the one account, they actually did not run well together. So then we went to the consumer one, not to the consumer ones, to the business version of Oculus, and that of Oculus Quest, and that didn't really have what we really needed, as far as it didn't have a browser initially, but it has now, and it's also very, very expensive to keep that up. So it's about $250 per headset each year. So hopefully there is some talk about that going away, that fee, and now it's taken over from Meta. So we'll see what happens.
So if that doesn't happen, how will you move forward then?
Look, we actually have also, for Swimmer, we purchased a number of Picos, which don't have that yearly fee. And then we will get the development team, Haydon's team, to actually develop the app that works with Pico, and we'll be using it through that. So.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. Miranda, I wanted to congratulate the ability to turn everything around in 4 weeks. That's impressive. Will you continue to deliver it the way that you delivered it moving forward?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that there was so much benefit to the students from learning those remote working skills, particularly as I mentioned that the need to develop, manage and deliver humanitarian programs from remote locations is not new. It's not isolated to a global pandemic, and it's actually something that's addressed every day in the humanitarian field around those access constraints. As to the future of the unit, I think it's also a decision for the university as well. But I do see the benefit of having digital and analog learning together being very, very complementary. And that's one of the lessons that we learned. So as we continue to develop the unit, potentially we could see some integration where it's digital and face-to-face too. But I think that a few more conversations would need to be had with other stakeholders involved.
Yes, makes absolute sense. We've got a couple of questions that have popped up. The first one from Michael Hardy. For Karen, did you 3D model the environments in-house? What tools did you use? Did you buy any models, for example, chairs, tables, etc., from a third-party source?
I believe I can answer that.
Thank you.
Yes, so we do have our own 3D modelers in-house. All the environments, all the objects were made by our 3D artists. We have 2 primary 3D artists on our team, a few other people who can pick up when we need to as well. So yeah, we were able to make all of our environments to fit the scenarios as best possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question from David. What influenced your choice of metrics to use to measure the user experience? I'm assuming this is for Karen, is it? Karen, can you answer that one?
Look, it was a combined effort for the research team. So basically, because we came from all different disciplines, we used a bit of each, really, probably. Certainly the study 3 was chosen by the psychology team who are involved in PBS, and they're the metrics that they usually use to see whether there's any change in any training. With the other ones, it was a bit of a mixture from National League of Nursing, I think it's Kennedy for simulation sickness, and then a couple of them we put them together. The actual, what do you call it? The actual, can't think of the word. The actual one for, probably, hang on. The one where we looked at, the experience, was actually done from a number of studies, but we also did our own heuristic studies to actually come up with those measures. So I hope that answers it.
Great, thank you. And we've got a question from Anjum to Miranda. Great presentation. Can you expand a little more on the 4th game you have planned?
That's a great question. So we had three games, I believe. As Gary designed those games, I think that's probably a question best directed to him, unfortunately, as to what that 4th game would be. But I'm happy to pass that question on and have him get back to you around that.
Absolutely. It's a shame. Gary's in here somewhere though, isn't he?
In the forum, I believe it.
Great. Karen, again to you. You mentioned quite a bit of attrition. Moving forward, is there any considerations for like VR sickness? Maybe different headsets or a different method of delivery?
Look, I mean, that's a really interesting one, and I've just got on the committee for Standards Australia for VR at the moment, and there is certainly a lot of talk about, whether Oculus is ideal because all the weight seems to be at the front. We certainly, the standards are coming out and they'll be out in a couple of years' time, no doubt. But, I guess at the moment, we're just going to have to give the students a choice of whether they want to go into VR or not. For most of them, look, it wasn't too bad. It was very early on that they got the simulation sickness. We took the headsets off, obviously, and made them sit down and didn't let them drive home for a little while. And they recovered fairly quickly, but I think it's going to be an issue. The higher end ones, obviously, we assume would have less of an effect. I don't know why we got so many. It's really quite surprising that it's so high. But I think it's worked a bit better. Kath might be able to tell you with the DSWs. Have you had many develop simulation sickness? Or
so we trained overall like over 100 people, some of those online using VR headsets in an online setting. And what we found was that for people who already had the experience of migraines in their life, virtual reality headsets were often really difficult for them to use. So there seemed to be some sort of correlation there with people who were inclined to have serious headache experience being inflamed by the use of headsets. Some of those people, we were very strongly urging people to put safety first in a safety at work project. Do not persist if it's making you feel unwell, but some of them would push through regardless. And of course, in an online environment, you're not there to well, not that we would physically prevent someone, but you're not as convincing. You don't have as much control. And also, like, they had the headsets in their homes, which we would use like in a weekly Zoom sort of meeting. So what they were doing outside of that time, we didn't have much control over that either. So for some of those people, they pushed through all the scenarios, but then chose not to use it in any of the later sessions, which we supported their decision, of course. So there was quite a few.
And I guess to the question, will you consider something else? We've just purchased a number of headsets. We can't really afford to consider something else at the moment. So unfortunately, they're quite expensive, and we've just purchased 30 headsets. So
I mean, it definitely has to be a choice from the participants' point of view. But one of the methods we were looking at around that was being able to watch a video of a playthrough with a commentary. So for the people, they're watching a screen and watching somebody else make the choices rather than doing it themselves, which isn't as on point in a VR situation, but it does at least enable them to participate in the discussion and be involved in the reflection in the debrief. So.
Great, thank you both. That's great. And one last question probably is all we'll have time for, and this is from Nanako from Miranda. Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. So what is the definition of humanitarian in your digital SimX game?
That's such a fantastic question, because as we know, there is no one set definition of humanitarian. So what we actually did first in terms of the lecture content was that we walked students through humanitarian discourse and provided them with different definitions of what humanitarianism means and what it meant at different times. From there, we went ahead with the good humanitarian donorship principles of humanitarianism, which is in academics one accepted definition, and in the international humanitarian aid and development community definition, which is any activity that aims to save lives and alleviate suffering, while also putting measures into place to build the resilience of communities. The simulations that the students were provided with were based on real-world events as well. For the United Nations to become involved in an international humanitarian response, it needs to meet 5 criteria and be at a level 3 or above. So in addition to our good humanitarian donorship principles definition, the humanitarian situations that the students were provided with were also at that level 3 or above in terms of something that requires international interventions to support the affected government and affected population as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you everyone for the questions. That's great, great engagement. So again, thanks Miranda and Karen, and also Haydon and Kath, obviously, for your presentations and for participating in the Q&A today. That concludes the session. So it's time now for a break. Fred Harkey will be running an action station on capacity building for simulation in the community section, if you want to check that out. Please join him for an informal discussion. And also please feel free to visit our Platinum sponsors virtual stand, Liddell, Australia and New Zealand. After the break, we'll run 3 concurrent sessions. Please join us again from 1 o'clock. Thanks again.